Well, hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Jennifer. And I'm going to be podcasting today about podcasting. That's right. I'm going to podcast about podcast. All right, listen. So I was telling my team, there are so many people who need to be doing a podcast who aren't. I was actually in conversation with an internet friend of mine. Do any of you have like real life friends and internet friends? So an internet friend of mine, person that's in ministry that has tons and tons and tons of content, like on YouTube, on Instagram, but they don't have a podcast. And I was like, why aren't you doing a podcast? And they're like, it's on my schedule. Something I've been meaning to do. And I'm like, okay, well, get it onto your schedule for next year, because listen, there are some of you listening right now that maybe you've thought about a podcast. Maybe you've, toyed with the idea. Maybe you've been a writer and it didn't even occur to you that you actually might enjoy podcasting. And I want to give you just some things to like mull over. Okay. And I want to give you some things to mull over, just to kind of roll around with and things, but not as a way just for you to continue rolling over, but for you to kind of decide, I just said rolling over, but to decide if you're actually going to do a podcast in 2023. All right. Because there's some do's and don'ts. There's some reasons you should start a podcast in 2023 and some reasons that you shouldn't. But if in fact you have a message within you that the world needs and you are able to conversate or communicate or tell stories in a way that people can learn from, and you need another way of meeting people instead of just social media, which many of us are very frustrated with, a podcast is a really great thing for you to consider. Okay. If you're listening right now and you're like, nope, I am out, O-U-T, out, Jen, listen, just sit and listen anyway. You might learn something. It might just inspire an idea. But I want to give you like 3 reasons why you might want to start a podcast. Okay. All right. You ready? Okay. So first of all, let me just say this. Having a podcast right now is kind of like having a business card. So if you can remember back 15 years ago when every business, I wish you guys were watching me on YouTube right now. The dog is needing petted. The dog is needy. But do you remember like 15 years ago when everybody had business cards? And it's funny because I had business cards, but I was like, ooh, I don't want like traditional business cards. So I did like a trifold brochure. And then it was like your website is your business card. Still is. All right. And then you hear people saying, if you write a book, that's like your business card. Okay. Perhaps also. But the newest business card is a podcast. There's something that happens when you tell people that you have a podcast. They think about what it is that you do for work just slightly differently. And I don't care if you're like in the health and wellness space, if you're in the coaching space, if you're an author, because many people can write, not everybody can talk. Can I say that again? Many people can write, but not everybody can talk. Let me just go one step further. I'm going to give you a little news flash. Many people can hire a ghostwriter to write for them. Ooh, did she say that? She said that. Many people can hire somebody to write for them. All those books you see in Barnes and Noble, on Amazon, do you think every one of those authors wrote every word themselves? No, many of them had a ghostwriter write it for them. So let me just say, many people can put out books, but not everybody can talk in a way that people will listen, and in a way that people will pay attention, and in a way that people will continue to come back to. Okay. So let me just say that. So I do believe that starting a podcast is kind of like, the 2022 way of having a business card. So let's talk about 3 reasons that you should start a podcast. You ready? Okay. Number 1, seed planting. Seed planting. I talk about this with all of my clients. Don't start a podcast for making money. It's not a money maker. It's a lead generator. Okay. Let me say that again. Podcasting should not be started as a way to make money. It should be started as a way to generate leads. And if you're like, wait, what? Okay. So I know you guys know that I teach about 8 different ways you can make money in the online space. This is what my Better Way program is. If you're like, wait, 8 different ways of making money. Yep. You can go to jenniferallwood.com/quiz. jenniferallwood.com/quiz and take a really cute, really fast quiz on what are some different revenue streams that you should be doing to make money with your business. Okay. Podcasting is not one of them. It's not. I teach 8 different ways. Podcasting is not one of them, because literally the only way you can make a lot of money at a podcast is if you have a huge, amount of downloads happening and subscribers, and you have advertisers who are willing to A, advertise on your platform, and B, they're a good fit for you. But that means lots and lots of downloads. That means big audience. And it's also usually not in the beginning big dollars. It really isn't. I mean, I make virtually no money off of my podcast because I use it to generate leads. Okay, what do you mean, Jen? All right, listen. I want you to think of your podcast as seed ground. I want you to think about your podcast as a way for you to connect with people in a way that will plant the seed of them wanting to buy from you later. Okay, let me say that again. Some of you, I'll say in a different way. Some of you are listening to my podcast right now. And because I deliver value on my podcast, the seed has been planted. Gosh, I want to get into Jen's mastermind one day. Dang, I want to take that Better Way program from her. It's a seed planter. It's a way to remind people that you have a product line. It's a way to remind people that you do coaching. It's a way to remind people you have a marriage course that they can sign up for. It's a way to remind people you have a crafting, business or whatever. Think of your podcast as seed planting. Okay. It's lead generating. It's seed planting. It really is not a moneymaker usually. We're getting ready to hit 5 million downloads. It's still making virtually no dollars. And let me just say this. We have tried running some ads on my podcast before with like ad agencies, but it always felt out of integrity to me because it would be like, we want you to advertise these supplements. Well, I haven't taken those supplements. I don't want to actually like tell you about supplements I haven't taken before. That feels like a big fat lie. I'm telling you how great it makes me feel. No, it doesn't. I've never put that thing in my mouth. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. Or underwear commercials. I mean, yeah, no, this is a PG podcast. I'm not doing advertising Hanes underwear. Like, so it just never felt like a good fit for me. So I've let it just like go ahead and settle in my brain. I am using my podcast as lead generation. I ask people to share my podcast with their friends and their family and anybody else that needs business advice from a biblical perspective, but I really am not trying to monetize it. Would I like to down the road? Well, of course, right? I'd add to love, I'd add to love. I'd love to add another revenue stream, but that is not what my intention is right now. And if you've never started a podcast before, you need to just use it in the beginning as a lead generator and a seed planting. Okay. Number two. This is the number 2 reason why you should start a podcast. Okay. Your ideal client could definitely be listening. Okay. The demographic for people that listen to podcasts versus people who don't is very different. By and large, if you look at statistics, people that listen to podcasts have a higher level of completed education. Podcast listeners a lot of times have college educations, which means they value paying for things like education. So if you're like, I teach people how to get out of debt, great. You want people that, have perhaps a higher level of education because they've already invested in education. So they're already used to putting money out for that, which is great for you, right? Also, people who listen to podcasts, generally their median household income is higher than people who do not listen to podcasts. In other words, if their median income is higher, perhaps you hope that also their discretionary income, the income that they have that they're able to just spend on anything, is also higher. Therefore, they would be more likely to buy whatever it is that you're selling, whether it's a product, a course, a group, or what have you. The people who listen to podcasts generally are not on social media as much. These are people who value deep thinking usually and are more studious. They're book readers. They're people who are, they're paying attention to different things. Now, do I have a podcast? Yes. Do I listen to podcasts? Yes. Do I also play on social media all day? I sure do. Okay. So these aren't like hard and fast rules, but here's what I'm saying. If you have something for sale and the thing that you have for sale is, if there's any weight to the price, okay? So you're not selling $14.99 earrings. You want to do a podcast because it puts you in front of a demographic of people that usually has the ability to pay for things in a different way than people who are just on social media. In addition, you don't have a lot of older people who listen to podcasts, who are a little more hesitant to spend in the online space. So like my mom, for instance, I don't think my mom listens to my podcast. That's fine. My dad said to me a few years ago, honey, I hear you have a radio show. Oh, it's actually a podcast, but that's, they're not podcast listeners. That generation, my parents are both over 70. They're not by and large podcast listeners. Now, if you're 70 and you are listening to this podcast, God bless you. I am so glad. The closer I get to 70, the younger that sounds. Okay. But I'm just saying that as a general rule, that generation is a little slower to take out their debit cards anyway and spend online. Just it's a trust issue. And that's usually not your demographic, right? So usually your listeners are going to be in a younger demographic, that 30 to 60 age range. And those are the people usually that are able to take out a debit card more readily than a younger clientele or a much older clientele. So your ideal client possibly is a podcast listener. That's another reason. So reason number one is it's seed planting, it's lead generating. Reason number two is your ideal client could be a podcast listener. Give them a podcast. Okay. Reason number three, it just adds to your legitimacy. All right. So as more and more people get into this online space game, as more and more people figure out how to get out of the traditional 9-to-5 and work for themselves, as more and more people open up their own businesses in the last 2 years because they don't want to work for someone anymore. They believe that the security they once felt by getting a paycheck from somebody else is, they've listened to my podcast and they know that it's just perceived security. It's not really any more secure at all. And they want to set their own course. They want to create something for their own family. They want to change their family's trajectory. They want to do business. If that's you, let me just tell you that having a podcast is just another way for you to add to the legitimacy that will separate you from your competitors. Okay. In addition, so a podcast and a book, either one is great, but a book costs so much more money, you guys. The amount of money, the cost of entry into podcasting is very low. It's very low. You need a podcast mic. I use a Yeti Blue. You can go to Jennifer Allwood Amazon store. Just Google Jennifer Allwood Amazon store. Go under my business tools, my Yeti mic right there. My cute little bling, bling, bling podcast wrap, I believe is also in my Amazon store. Then you've got to, buy you got to sign up for like the podcast hosting. We use Libsyn. Then you're going to need somebody to edit your podcast unless you're savvy enough to do that. I have somebody that edits my podcast. He's very reasonable. And then he uploads it to Libsyn, which pushes it out to all the different platforms, to Apple, to Spotify, all the places. And bada boom, bada bing, it just turns up on the internet. It's like having a business card in the year 2022. Another reason that it adds to your legitimacy is this. One of the struggles that business owners are having right now is, how do I grow my following, get more people on my email list, get more followers on social media without paying for ads? Because in case you haven't ran a Facebook ad lately, it is outrageous. Mark Zuckerberg, if you're listening, outrageous. Outrageous. I've got so many thoughts on that. And so you do not have to pay to play. Okay. First of all, quit speaking that over your business. You don't have to pay to play. You do not have to run Facebook ads, but you do either have to put out stellar content that is shareable, that people want to be a part of, that is super fun to look at, or videos that you can watch. So you either have to be good at that, or you need to figure out how you can leverage other people's platforms by getting on those platforms. So then hopefully you can gain some more followers and email subscribers organically without paying for ads. So the win-win is, if you have a podcast, you get invited to be on other people's podcasts, OPPs, more often, because people are like, oh, Jen has a podcast. Gosh, she has, 400 episodes on here. She has 2,000 reviews. She has 5 million downloads. I bet she would be a good guest for me. So then you get invited to be on as a guest with other people's podcasts. So then you're introduced to their audience at no cost. You go blow their socks off. You communicate well. You serve them to the best of your ability. You ask if I could possibly give them a freebie while I'm there. Then you give them a freebie, and then they get on your email list, and it's a winner chicken dinner. Point number one was it's great for lead generation. Point number two is your ideal client could be listening. Point number three just adds to your legitimacy. It just really does. So if all things are equal and you've got a podcast, but your competitors don't, totally different. Totally different. All right. And the other thing is, I mean, I have a book too, right? And I love writing Fear is Not the Boss of You. I loved, publishing the Get Unstuck and Stay Unstuck. I love that. I have an ebook for prayers for business people. I have a traditional book, and then I have a gift book. So I have 3 different kinds of books. So I've done the books. The podcast is so much easier to sustain because I do, 2 episodes that are less than 10 minutes or 15 minutes long every single week. This one might have went a little bit longer. And it's new, it's fresh all the time. I don't have to pay, for books to be printed, shipped, any of those things. So if you have considered starting a podcast, I just really want to encourage you to not only just consider it, but just to put a date on your calendar for 2023. Like literally figure out, I am going to actually start a podcast in Q1. And then I want you to work things backwards. Okay, what's that going to take? You need the name of a podcast. You need to find somebody to help you create the graphics that's going to go on like iTunes and Spotify. You need to get a podcast mic. You need to find somebody that's going to be able to edit the podcast for you. You need to figure out what you're going to name it. You need to figure out which podcast episodes you're going to come out with right out of the gate. You need to figure out how often are you going to podcast? What can people expect from you? But I really encourage you to do it. It is a great way to just really practice your communication skills, to really hone in on your messaging, to really find a different clientele or get in front of your ideal clientele, to generate leads for your sales, and to just add to the legitimacy of your business, which a lot of you really need. All right. So listen, if this is right up your alley, if you love hearing of other ways that you can expand your business, I am doing one more 3-day workshop before we end 2022 and roll into 2023. It is December 6th through the 8th. We start at 10 a.m. every day. It's a 3-day workshop. If you've never been to one of my workshops before, listen, it's $10. It's $10. If you have not gotten into one of my workshops, please do. You will get back 10 times that in value. If you learn anything from my podcast, which I use as a seed planter, by the way, get into one of my workshops. What do you possibly have to lose? You have spent $10 in way worse ways. Am I right? Am I right? So you can go sign up at jenniferallwood.com/workshop. Once again, that's jenniferallwood.com workshop. But go sign up for a 3-day workshop as we end out 2022. We're going to be talking about things that you can do to be growing your business in 2023, ways that you can work smarter and not harder for the love. Stop with your 10, 12, and 16-hour day. Being the busiest person that people know. There's no honor in that, friends. There is no honor in that. I want to teach you how to work less and make more. So go get my workshop, jenniferallwood.com/workshop. I want you to find a date on the calendar. You're going to start a podcast. I want you to commit to that for 2023. Okie dokie. All right, friends. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.